Good to see you here. Now, today we are celebrating the mother of all public service broadcasters, the BBC. As you most probably know, the BBC has been an example for very many channels all over the world. And talking about drama, they had their first drama ever on the 14th of July, 1930, 14 juillet. So that can't be any better for us French. That being said, drama has always kept a very important place in the BBC. And to celebrate this, we've got some very prestigious guests today. The first of all that I would like to call is Hilary Salmon, who is the head of BBC Drama London at BBC Studios. Please give Hilary a warm welcome. So we're going to start putting Hilary under pressure, wherever you like, where you're comfortable. First of all, Hilary, it would be really great if you could tell us about you, because you're behind all these shows that we have seen clips of. I guess you recognize quite a lot of them. So, can you tell us about you first?
Okay. So, I suppose the thing to start by saying is that I feel I've been tremendously lucky in my career, and it's not modest to say that. I mean, that's a lot of the programs I've made. I've made some programs since then as well, and before then. And I kind of feel it's been such a privilege to work at the BBC for as long as I have, which is just over 30 years now, and to be almost continuously in production with new drama. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. And I don't think that's something that could be replicated without the BBC being there. So, I mean, in terms of my background, I grew up in subsidised theatre, having worked at the Arts Council for a bit, then went to work for the Royal Court Theatre. And I think I was probably also lucky in the fact that my taste in stories that had something to say, in worlds we haven't seen together, but seen before, unrepresented communities, that taste matched very happily with the BBC, and still does match very happily with the BBC, and is probably why I've been able to dig in there for as long as I have.
Well, long live there. Now, could you plunge into what it's like to produce for the BBC? I mean, what are the specificities, the obligations of the BBC, the remits?
Yes, that's an interesting one. I mean, okay, so the BBC hour is very long, because there are no ad breaks, so that's a specificity, particularly if you're making dramas that don't have a kind of thriller pulse to them, aren't a crime story. Sometimes that 58, 59 minutes of screen time can feel very long. There are all sorts of editorial policy guidelines around violence and language, and working with children, and being impartial and truthful in our stories, which apply to drama as much as they do to the news and current affairs. I suppose, I mean, I think it's still true to say that the BBC is the broadcaster that writers and directors and independent companies in the UK still want to most work for. Maybe that's not quite true, but it feels as if it is. It certainly has been until very recently true. And so I always feel that if you've been commissioned by the BBC, you're kind of beholden to make something really special, because there's such competition for slots and such competition for commissions. And that was true when, well, we'll go on to talk about BBC Studios, I'm sure, but that was true when we were an in-house department of the BBC, even though we were protected by a guarantee. It was just as true then as it is now.
So you moved from in-house to the new BBC Studios entity. Could you tell us how that was formed, why it was formed, and what are the challenges? And
Yes, I certainly can. So BBC Studios was formed just over a year ago and has taken out of the BBC into a commercial company pretty much all the genres of in-house production, with the exception of news and current affairs, and children's, and one or two other genres which were not perceived to be commercial enough to make their way out there in the real world. So in terms of the background to that decision, I think there were a number of factors. Just talking about drama, the explosion of independent production companies in drama in the last 10 years in particular has been exponential. So when I made Criminal Justice, which was one of the shows that's clipped up there, which is only 10 years ago, I think there were fewer than 10 independent companies under commission by the BBC. And now there are, it must be getting up towards 150. That's in 10 years. And I think the pressure from the independent community, and also the fact that quite a lot of those little companies are owned by big conglomerates. You know, there are 20 big conglomerates making 70% of the production in the UK production sector. So those companies supported by these big financial concerns, there's a lot of pressure coming for the BBC to open up its whole, all of its production, all of its hours to the best possible idea, the best possible show, and not to protect an in-house production arm in quite the way it had been through the guarantee that we had of hours. But at the same time as that, certainly the experience of being in-house, I think we were feeling too that it was becoming increasingly restrictive just to make shows for the BBC, to not be able to take any of the opportunities that were also exploding at the same time. So, for instance, for the for a Netflix or an Amazon, for US broadcasters, and indeed for our own UK broadcasters, ITV, Channel 4, we were hampered by the fact that if we developed a script that we really liked for the BBC, we weren't able to take it anywhere else if the BBC didn't want it. And that was starting to damage our relationships with writers a little bit, because they felt that they would have to find a new home if that idea didn't get taken up. So there was pressure from both sides. But it's been a very, very big change. It's quite a seismic change not to have that baseline guarantee of hours. We're still making an enormous number of shows for the BBC, including returners that we've brought with us.
Yes.
And I don't know whether you know, but the BBC is going through this rather excruciating tendering process where shows that have been made by in-house departments are being tendered out to the whole indie community to bid for, and then we kind of have to win them back or lose them. And that's quite painful for people who've worked on shows over a very long period of time. But so far we've been quite successful in the drama sphere with that.
So you know that this year here at Série Series we're celebrating public service broadcasters, and of course the BBC being one fabulous example, as I said. How do you think that public service broadcasters can best serve the public?
Well, you can look at the BBC annual report to see what the aims of the BBC are, and they haven't really changed over the years. Interpreting them for drama, I think creativity, originality, the quality of the output on the one hand, and then serving all audiences on the other. Those are the two that matter most to me as a drama producer. That I think that second one in particular, it is behoven on the BBC, which is funded by everybody who uses a television in the country, to make programmes for all audiences. And I think that's an increasing challenge. Actually, it's both harder than ever to make really successful returning shows, which I'll talk about in a minute. But
is it an ambition in itself to?
It's an ambition in itself to make a really successful returning show that actually sticks, that can come, gets enough of an audience to come back. But if you can hit that magic formula, obviously you're reaching a lot of people all at the same time. And the BBC's always had to make those shows. Those shows have, in a way, bought the BBC the right to make those pieces that perhaps are, we say in the UK, more Marmite. Some people like them, some people don't like them. You get a smaller, smaller audience inevitably. And one kind of balances the other out. We have to be there in the mainstream, but you also have to make shows which are a little bit more niche. And I think it's harder than ever to make those very successful shows. In terms of the niche markets, we are underserving young audiences. We are underserving BAME audiences. We are underserving young disabled audiences, actually. And that's really about making programmes which feel authentic to them, but also which feel entertaining to them.
Well, wasn't the reason why BBC Three went online completely to try and keep a certain pull over the younger?
And I think it is doing that. It just doesn't invest in drama very much.
But what they do, I mean, they've had some very successful pieces of drama, and when they're successful on BBC Three, they move on to BBC Two.
It's true. There aren't very many of them. BBC Three would say this. This isn't controversial. And Piers Wenger, who's the drama commissioner at the BBC at the moment, would say this. You know, everybody wants to put more money into BBC Three drama. It makes absolute sense. But in order to do that, something else has to go, of course.
Yes, yes. Talking about this, I mean, is there such a thing as a public service broadcaster drama? Something that you would do, take the risk to do, as opposed to what commercial channels would not do?
Probably, but I like to think that public service ethos runs through everything that we do, whether it's a successful returning popular show or whether it's a searing true story like Three Girls that we made recently that feels...
Yes. I mean, I want to talk about this, you know,
the
fact that this was a difficult subject. And this is, to my way of thinking, in the line, you know, straight from the beginning of the 2000 years, with when Ruth Caleb was making Care, and then when I was 12, Three Girls. I don't know how many of you have seen that, but this is an exceptional show. Could you say a few words about the genesis of this?
Yes,
please?
Of course. So, as I say, this is a true story drama. There have been a series of scandals all over England, chiefly in the north of England in the last few years, of young girls, underage girls from difficult backgrounds, impoverished backgrounds mostly, not entirely, but mostly, who are being systematically abused by gangs of men, Asian men as it happens, which made it an even more difficult story to tell. And a story that people kind of shied away from a little bit. So my colleague Sue Hogg researched the story over a period of time. She had a very good police contact who she'd met on another development, and she'd also heard one of the young girls and her father talking on the radio when this particular trial went to court. And that was the Rochdale case, and it was the first case where the crime of sex trafficking has ever been convicted in the UK. So we developed the scripts with the writer Nicole Taylor around three real girls who these events had happened to. Obviously fictionalised it to some extent, although actually very, very little. It's surprising how little fiction there is in Three Girls. We've changed their names, we've changed some of the specificities around them because they are anonymous in their real lives. Nobody knows that those things happened to them, and their anonymity was retained in court. But it's a very, I don't know how many people have seen it. I think it's a very hard show to watch.
Yes.
If I say so myself, it's a very hard show to watch. There's a really horrible rape in the first episode, which we don't see. I mean, I think that was commissioned primarily because it was an important story to tell. I think that was the first and foremost. It was a very brave story for the BBC to tell, and as I say, a difficult show to watch, but beautifully directed, I think, by Philippa Lowthorpe, who really forged a relationship with the young actresses who played the three main girls, and we were all amazed that it got a huge audience. We really didn't expect it. I mean, it just shows how you just don't know what's going to bring an audience and what isn't. It didn't feel like a show that was going to get 8 million watching, and many, many more on iPlayer. And also a young audience, which again surprised us. So it was a kind of lesson in those shows that people really buy into as being truthful, as being a show that puts the audience in the shoes of the characters. I think that's the kind of key thing, and makes you realise, why did they take those decisions? Why did they keep going back to those men to be raped again? How could you do that? And I think by the time you finish watching the film, you really understood what that sort of grooming is and why it's so effective.
And obviously it wasn't a unique situation, because
sadly not unique at all. No. The new case is coming up now.
I mean, just after this particular series, there was a documentary made. I think it was called "The Betrayed Girl."
Yeah.
This is something which seems to be happening now, because I'm talking about the show that we're going to open the festival officially tonight with, you know, which is a very English scandal. Immediately after the show on BBC One, we had on BBC Four a documentary about the whole story, which is behind the series. Is it something that you tend to do more, or is it?
I think that was more serendipitous. I think the documentary department had an idea for a documentary they wanted to make, and Charlotte Moore, who runs the channel, was keen to encourage that. Personally, I don't think it was necessarily ideal that both cases were the Rochdale case, but that was about access, really. That was about access to the girls' stories. So not surprising that they picked the same girls, because they're the ones that they could get to speak. I don't know whether that's a trend particularly. I think a bit more random.
It sort of struck me as something when the subject is important. Let's have a documentary immediately afterwards and see how people react. And it did work. In both cases, the audience was massive. Yeah. Which was, a little bit surprising.
More for the drama, I think you'll find.
Yes. Is it the power of the drama which is driving the existence of a documentary afterwards, or do you think there is a need for something more after the drama?
I don't know. I mean, a documentary obviously can do things that drama can't do, but drama can definitely do things that documentary can't do.
Yes, absolutely.
And particularly in a story like that, where you wouldn't be able to have those girls' faces on camera, and there are very few girls who will speak out. We can actually allow the audience into those girls' lives in a way in which they would never be able to experience in documentary.
Did you follow them up afterwards? I mean, do you know what happened to these girls?
Yes, we do, Yeah, in their real lives. They were very close to the production, and they saw all the cuts before we transmitted the programme. So
one of the young actresses got an award, didn't she?
Molly Windsor got the Best Actress award at BAFTA.
And is there
She's
any
in her early 20s. She's shot 2 more dramas since then.
Good.
So she's on her way.
Very good.
Yeah,
very good
fantastic.
To hear.
Really fantastic.
Before we start talking about commissioning and the commissioning process, which to some people is a little bit of a mysterious affair, just to finish with BBC Studios, I mean, you have BBC Studios London, and then in the regions of the UK, how do they coordinate? How does that work?
Yeah, it's all BBC Studios. I mean, the way in which certainly our head of scripted, Nick Betts, likes to think about it is that he will respond to, if there's someone he wants to work in studios and they want to work in Manchester, he'll set up a little hub there. The hubs, the sort of hubs, which are just little teams of people who are working together, they are quite small. So it's actually quite straightforward to say, well, you can work out of Manchester. We've got a big base there in Salford anyway.
Oh, yes.
I would say it's more that than, certainly in England, in the English regions, it's more that than that they have a particular remit to make drama out of the north. There is a remit, obviously, to make drama in the other nations, in Scotland.
Yes.
And Wales in particular.
And is there any form of coordination? Because supposing everybody wanted to literally create the same show or same kind of show.
We share our development slates.
And then you get the final word, or who does?
No, the best idea, of course.
Okay. Yeah. I see. So I'd like you to say a few words about the green lighting process.
Okay.
This is something which seems a little bit dark for some people. That not everybody understands how things work. How do you get to green light a show rather than another? How does that work?
Okay. So in the new world, we have our own development. In the BBC Studios, we have our own development money, which a number of the indies do as well, which we can spend, and we can develop a show to script stage with that money. However, we're sort of moving over to a desire to get the broadcasters to pay for that development. When we were all part of the BBC, we didn't have to worry about where the money was in quite the same way.
Quite so, yeah.
So, say we were developing a show now for the BBC, and we felt it was a particularly BBC resonant show, we would go to one of the commissioning editors in Piers' team and ask them to support that development, which basically means support it editorially, talk to the writer with us, help us to develop the show, literally help us develop it, but also pay for that development.
Right.
And that then sort of ties it into that broadcaster, which is a good and a bad thing. It's good because it means that it has a home,
yes,
and the broadcaster knows about it and is expecting it to come in. It's bad in the sense that it might make it, if it gets turned down by that broadcaster, it might make it less desirable to go elsewhere. Right. So that's
kind of tainted somewhere.
Potentially. There are some other broadcasters who feel that way, who don't want second-hand shows.
Right.
But that's the first part of the process. And then if out of that process, you develop a script that commissioning exec really loves and feels fits within the strategy that Piers Wenger has in mind, then she will take it, he or she will take it to Piers for him to consider. If he likes it, he might ask for some more work to be done.
Yes.
But basically, it will find its way. He has half of the commissioning, half of the green lighting decision, and the other half of the green lighting decision lies with the channel. So in BBC One's case, it'd be Charlotte Moore. In BBC Two's case, it'd be Patrick Holland. And there has to be a kind of alignment of the stars between the two of them before you actually get what's called the editorial green light, which means the BBC wants to make that show.
Okay.
It will give you its license fee amount per hour, which is never enough to make the show. But you then have a platform in which to go out to try and raise co-production money, distribution money to finish off the budget. And then when you've got all of that and your funding matches your budget, then you can literally financially greenlight the show.
You used the word strategy talking about Piers Wenger just now. Can I ask you, do you know what his strategy is for drama?
Well, he's talked quite extensively about his strategy. I mean, I think, there were some big words in it. One of them is diversity. He's, very hot on diversity, gender diversity, BAME, and he has turned the ship around quite radically in his first couple of years. And there are definitely more writers writing for different communities, both on his slate, but also that he's green lit.
Okay.
That has changed. I think one of the other things that's changed, which I don't know whether he's particularly made public, but it's very clear, is that he wants to see the return of shorter form pieces. Whereas we'd all been running over to the side of the ship that says we must make 8-parters and 10-parters, because it's only those big things that get noticed. Actually, in the year that 3 Girls went out, there were several other 3- and 4-part shows which were also very successful. And I think that's given BBC One the confidence to say those pieces are still wanted, they make a mark, and they allow the schedule to be much more genuinely diverse.
Yes.
You haven't just got 2 or 3 big oil tankers a season. You've got these little pieces that offer something different.
I mean, gradually we've seen a bigger number of 3-parters over the years. I mean, is this a trend which is likely to continue?
I think it stopped. I think there was a period, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when we stopped developing those because we thought they weren't wanted. And a writer would come in and say, I've got a 3-part story, and we go, couldn't it be 6, please?
Yes.
Because it's more likely to get greenlit.
Yes.
But that's gone away now, and now we're saying, great, it's 3, that's good.
So 3, 5, maybe
3,
6?
5, 6, 8, but I think 8 is probably rarer than it was a couple of years ago.
Okay, well, that's very good. Well, coming back to 3 Girls, I mean, it was written, as you said, by Nicole Taylor. Nicole Taylor was a fairly young writer, and she had the experience, and I would say she was very lucky to go through the BBC writers' room. So I would like to talk about how these writers are developed. And for this, I will call on stage Anne Evidian right away, who is the head of the BBC Writers' Room. So please welcome Anne. Okay. Right, and since we have other guests, I can't really make you wait, keep you waiting any longer. We would like to know a little more about comedy in this big house that is the BBC, and we've got Ben Caudle to talk about it. Please welcome Ben. And last but not least, we thought here at Série Series that it would be really interesting to have a sort of mirror image, and we would like to ask somebody who is an incredibly experienced, talented and well-liked writer and director to give his opinion about how he works with the BBC and what's it like. Is this a good cooperation? Are there things which are not so happy? And we're so happy to welcome Peter Kosminski. I think we'll have to share. Anne, first of all, what is the BBC Writers' Room? Can you tell us?
We are a small department within the BBC. We're not a writer's room in the American sense of a room full of writers. We're a small department in the BBC. We sit with commissioning, i.e. not with studios. In fact, we used to sit with studios. Hilary used to be my boss, in actual fact, but now we've gone over to the other side. We sit with commissioning. And we aim to find and develop and get working for the BBC the brightest and best new writers in comedy and drama, and some directors. And then we aim to meet both the general commissioning needs and specific programme needs out of that pool of writers.
So you started 13 years ago?
The Writers' Room started 13 years ago. I took over 3 years ago.
Yes. A very, basic question. How is this funded? Where do you get your money from?
Well, it's a basic question, but it's incredibly complicated.
Yes.
I'm really afraid. I was saying to somebody the other day, if you wanted to create the Writers' Room, you wouldn't start from here, but, it's grown organically. So we have some core funding, which is just general BBC money. And then, because the BBC wanted to represent different areas of the United Kingdom, I was asked if we could open Writers' Room offices in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So I have a little bit of what we call nations money, which is what I fund those from. And aside from that, we have some project funding for particular projects. Some have come from drama commissioning, some come from the BBC Academy, which is training. Some come from outside. I've had skill set and Directors UK money. And basically, I patch it together like embroidery.
Mm. You were telling us you had quite a few scripts to read every year. We were in a workshop earlier on about, precisely the subject of writers' rooms and how do you nurture talent. Can you say this figure again? Or perhaps I didn't hear properly.
We estimate that we deal with probably over 10,000 scripts a year.
Right, and how do you swim through that?
So, as I say, we're a small department, about 15 of us, but I have a team of very dedicated readers, between 20 and 30, a steady number of around 22, and the readers do the first sift, what we call the first sift for us, and that is reading the first 10 pages. Now, the readers I'm really particular about. I don't just employ sort of kids out of college or, children of friends or anything of that sort. I employ working professionals in the business to read these scripts. And I would say of that 10,000, 85 to 90% don't progress beyond a 10-page read. And that's really harsh, but when you're dealing with those numbers, if there's nothing exciting in those first 10 pages, we don't read the rest of it. And then that leaves us with a much more manageable number where we go into a lot more thorough exploration of the script.
So what are you looking for when you're reading these scripts?
We're looking for voice in a simple word. And I don't know if you use the same word, in French?
A voice, yes.
Yeah, we're looking for a voice. We're looking for writers. We're not looking for projects. So we're looking for that spark. That's something that somebody earlier called that holy fire. We're looking for that thing that makes that writer different to everybody else, whether it's a brilliant bit of dialogue, whether it's a character that leaps off the page, whether it's a situation we've never read before. We're looking for something that is unique and distinctive to that writer. We get a large number of well-made detective scripts. There's not a lot I can do with those. BBC's got loads of those already. Mm-hmm. Actually, what we're looking for is that voice, that uniqueness, that unique take on life.
And what do you do with these people? Not necessarily young, I understand. There are people who've been writing for years and suddenly they apply to be with you. What do you do with them? Fundamentally, it's a developing process.
It's a development process. So from our unsolicited script windows, as I say, we do one for drama and one for comedy, so we do 2 a year. For our unsolicited windows, we set up something we call drama room and comedy room. So drama room will be around 15 of the most talented writers who've come mostly through the unsolicited. We might nominate a couple of writers on it that we've spotted in scouting and whatever, but basically through the unsolicited. And we put those writers into a 6-month development process. Mm-hmm. Now, we know that when writers are starting out, everyone's got day jobs, they've got to live, and I'm really conscious of people have to live.
Of course.
So we do a day a month, a workshop day a month, but we absolutely pack it full of things. If somebody's had to give up a day's work, it's got to be worth their while. And those writers meet producers, they meet executive producers, they meet script editors, they meet commissioners, they learn how the business works. but they also meet other parts of the BBC. It's not all television. The biggest single commission of original drama in the UK is BBC Radio. And they ring-fence a certain number of slots for new writers. And in fact, radio is very filmic, in actual fact. I've worked in radio as well as television, so I feel very passionate. I love radio. So we introduce people to things like radio. We also have a big children's output, which take a lot of chances on new writers. I mean, it's not like a 60-minute episode, but if you've got, 26 episodes of 6 minutes, it's not such a risk to give a couple to some new writers. So we introduce them to children's. We provide a professional script editor to develop a calling card script, because I think you learn a lot from writing your script, actually.
The ropes.
Yeah, and so that then you then have a professional standard script to take out to production companies. We introduce them to agents, those who aren't agented. We introduce them to all the production companies, BBC Studios and all the independent production companies. When they're ready, this is towards the end, when they've got a good spec and everything else. Anything we can think of that we think will help them progress.
Okay. I was wondering whether there is a fairly high retention numbers, do you keep them within the BBC afterwards, or do you help them insert the BBC, or do they disappear into, other...
It's a really competitive business, and writers have to live, and we have to be philosophical about this, that writers will go where the work is and where people are going to pay them, but we do think that by forging good relationships with writers and treating them well early in their career, they often come back to us, or I'm still talking to writers, from years ago. They come in, tell me how they're going and what's going on. We just hope writers come back to us when they've got their authored series they want to pitch, they think the BBC would be a good home for. We have to be philosophical, and we are public service. In some ways, it's for the greater good of the industry as well. You can't hang on to talent in that same way.
You expect they come back to...
You expect them to come back. It's like kids, isn't it? If you love them, let them go. And, next minute they'll be back, eating your food and watching your telly. So.
Right. Well, this is a question to all of you. A few weeks ago, some UK's top drama chiefs called for more writing teams led by a showrunner, a bit like the American experience. Basically, they said that there were not enough of them in Britain, and also that it was difficult to convince writers to, I quote, immerse themselves with a project that they do not have full authorial control over, unquote. How do you feel about this? Peter, shall I ask you how you feel about the possible lack of...
Ooh, that's a difficult one. Well, I'm in favour of authored pieces. So generally speaking, I'm not that keen on the, the dissolving of the author into a sort of collective. But it depends on the project, and I'm working on something at the moment for Channel 4, which is commissioned as a 10-part series. Now, I can't write all 10 parts, and I probably can't direct all 10 parts. And because it's a concept rather than a story, and because it's intended as a returning series rather than a one-off, it lends itself to a writing team. There's a huge body of research, so you would pass that amongst the selected writing group and then get in a room together and see what ideas come up and try to evolve common characters. So I think it's a very different process from something like Three Girls, which was a three-parter, was telling one story. It's possible for one writer and one director to retain control of that. Generally speaking, I suppose what I'm trying to say is I don't think it's a panacea. I think it works in some cases.
Yes, yeah, okay.
I think the US model is very different from our UK model. I think it's interesting to contrast authorship with writers' rooms, because of course writers' rooms have created The Handmaid's Tale, Breaking Bad, and many other shows which feel authored to us, but then they have a very strong showrunner figure who kind of brings that authorship with him or her. I think that figure is really hasn't grown up in the UK industry, because they haven't had that opportunity to grow up in writers' rooms and understand how that is done. But I think without rooms, what we're getting at the moment, one of the reasons why we're finding it hard to develop those successful returning shows is that our returning shows are also written just by one person, which means that they don't return every year. They might return every 18 months or every 2 years, and they don't have an opportunity to build momentum.
I think the other thing to factor in, Hilary, is that the writers' room grew out of long-running shows, long series of, sometimes sort of 13, 14 parts or more. We don't have a tradition of making shows of that length in this country. I mean, you have to go back to things like Brideshead Revisited to think of shows that ran, apart from things like soaps, which are effectively written by, in a collective way. So I think it's partly what you say, but it's also the fact that we have a tradition, and you say we're coming back to it, which I think is great, of singles, 2-parters, 3-parters, 4-parters, 6 as a maximum, and it is feasible for one person to do all of that.
That's true, particularly if it's not going to return.
I think there's a difference as well between a writer's room where everyone is collectively writing every episode, and some of the rooms I visited in the States, one writer doesn't even script the whole thing. People write different scenes and then somebody else rewrites and whatever. But there is the model like Call the Midwife, for example, where Heidi doesn't write every episode. Other writers write episodes, but they do write their own episodes. So we do have in Britain that sensation of authorship, which America doesn't, I don't think. I was shocked to discover in an American writer's room that the credits are just handed out willy-nilly to make sure everyone gets a fair go of the rights. It doesn't mean they've actually written those episodes, whereas in Britain it really does mean that person's written that episode.
What about the world of comedy, Ben? Do you have this experience there?
Well, in comedy we do have writers' rooms.
Yes.
For writing, mainly, not so much for writing whole narrative sitcoms, but for writing sort of gags for comedians in entertainment shows. And in those, the comedian is normally the showrunner himself. He's the one choosing what jokes come out of it. Mm-hmm. And so he maintains, or she maintains, the sort of authorial voice through that. But in terms of sort of writers' rooms, group-written sitcoms, we don't, similarly in drama, we don't do 6 episodes is like enough for one person, and then they can have a rest, and then they can start writing it again, and that'll do nicely, thank you. And they keep their authorial voice and keep it funny. And I think sometimes when you have lots of people working on things, the funniness disappears, and people just sort of, oh, this'll do, and then it's not very funny. Every time it's been tried, it's sort of, the thing's said to be a bit limp after that process.
So what is your remit at BBC Comedy?
To make people laugh.
Okay, but beyond that?
I don't know if there is a beyond. I mean, isn't that enough? I think that's like the hardest thing to do.
It is.
And if you can make someone laugh at a thing, that you can sort of sleep easy at night. I think in broader terms, well, in fact, that's a really hard thing to do, make people laugh. Because for every successful show, like the most successful sitcom on British TV at the moment is Mrs. Brown's Boys. That gets like 10 million people really laughing at it. Like, love it. They love it. Yeah. But the other 50 million people in Britain absolutely despise it. Like, they hate it. They think they cannot believe that anyone thinks it's funny. And you only, I think, get that reaction in comedy, not because dramas aren't brilliant, but sometimes if you do a drama, people do a drama, they don't like it. They just sort of don't mention it. They don't bang on about it. If you do a comedy that someone doesn't like, they literally, they act as if people involved in it are total mental people, and they will not stop talking about it, and they just bang on about, how can they think that's funny? How do they think that's funny? And dramas, people just sort of go, no, I didn't watch it. But, comedies, people watch it literally wanting to hate it. So I would say, literally, if you've made someone laugh, that is like a breath of fresh air. That's amazing. Indeed. I mean, obviously, everyone else will hate it, but one person might like it, and that's enough.
Can I ask Ben a question?
Yeah, sure.
Where's the public service in comedy?
I think it's the most public service thing. I think when people get home at the end of the day, they've had a terrible life, terrible job, whatever. They come on. If you can somehow tickle a little physical movement from their throat out of them that makes them feel marginally better about their life, then, well done. That's the licence fee paid for
Fair
in
enough.
their heads.
Yeah, I accept that.
How many comedies do you have to, or do you produce every year for BBC?
Me, personally,
Well,
only one or two.
yeah.
But the BBC does 110 hours of comedy
110
a year,
hours.
which is quite a lot. I think it's more than
Yes.
anyone in Britain. And that comedy will be of a big range from very kind of niche stuff, it might be like online, that doesn't get many people watching it at all, but might have the Stars of Tomorrow in it, to, you know, whatever, what all the family wants to sit down and watch on Christmas Day and just be blessed that they don't have to speak to each other for 45 minutes. So a real gamut of stuff, basically.
Well, there was one, I don't know whether it came to the rest of Europe, called W1A, where the BBC was mocking itself. It was an incredible piece that, I mean, I enjoyed it tremendously, you know, because I don't think anybody else in some other countries, I won't name, could actually stomach that.
Why couldn't they stomach it?
Because the self-criticism is not there.
Oh, right.
You know,
I think no one probably enjoyed W1A more than the people that work at the BBC.
Yeah.
It felt like a documentary.
Yes,
I was going to say it's quite soft compared with real life at the BBC.
I know.
There's a weird thing in W1A, if you've seen it, where one of the running jokes is that all the meeting rooms are named after BBC people.
Exactly.
But the meeting rooms at the BBC are named after weird BBC figures. And so it's a satire that normal people watching at home go, that's weird. One of their meeting rooms is called Frankie Howard. One of the meeting rooms is called Frankie Howard. So I don't know if that's satire or truth.
I'm going to be in Frankie Howard. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. How transgressive or offensive is BBC comedy?
Very.
More than Channel 4? You've got both experience.
No, I think it. You know, comedy is often sort of risk-taking and skirts the line of offensiveness or a sort of edginess. I think comedy will often be like that because comedy is often sort of subversive and kicking against the establishment or established mores or undermining them in some way. I think the BBC is great in that you have your BBC One, which is going to be kind of family-orientated, more mainstream stuff. But on BBC Three or BBC Four, you kind of, people tuning into those channels are sort of aware what I might see might not be my cup of tea. Fair enough, I'll give it a go. You know, episodes of The Thick of It was like filled with swearing and bad language, but no one really complained because they knew that's what the show was.
Can you talk about pretty much anything?
Yeah, I think actually it's better to talk about everything because I think what people don't want is comedies that seem to be rerunning old things. And if you've got a new angle or a new idea, then people
how
want
about
to
budgets? I mean, how much have you got every year to do whatever you would like to do?
I don't know what BBC. I asked what BBC Comedy Commission budget was, and they wouldn't tell me. But the budgets for shows can be like, you know, they do shows. They've just started doing these shows called 3x3s, which are like little three-minute little bursts that are going to be for online things, and they get £5,000 per minute on that, which is quite. You know, it's an interesting budget for those. Yeah. But then the budgets could be like huge for big BBC One, you know, Christmas Day things. They're not going to skimp on those. Well, they are a bit, but anyway, you know, there's money there for those sort of things.
Yeah. And do you think comedy is the sort of genre to attract or keep the young viewers?
Young people love comedy. What they don't like, I think, is watching television. How do we square this circle? Well, we do what the young people do and go online. You may have heard of it. So I did this sketch show called Famalam, which was a sketch show with a black cast, and it was made for BBC Three, but we were very conscious when we were making it that what we wanted to eventually do was divide up the sketches and put them on YouTube and put them on Snapchat and things, because that's where our audience would actually watch them. So they were all made to be kind of with that in our heads, that despite the vast effort we went in trying to make them look nice, they would eventually be looked at on a tiny phone screen. It came actually directly from Shane Allen, who's the head of comedy at BBC, and he wanted to make a sketch show with a diverse cast, and came to us, and I said, the thing about this is I'm a middle-aged white man. Are you absolutely sure I should be involved in this? But what we found is a brilliant producer who'd never produced a thing before. So we sort of took a risk. He's a guy called Akemji, and he's been an actor, and he's been a writer, never produced a thing. But there were no black comedy producers around. There just weren't any. We looked for them everywhere. So we sort of took a risk on him doing it. And he's absolutely brilliant. And the show sort of came out. We did a pilot of it last year. And then we've done 4 episodes of it this year for BBC Three. And it's a thing about sketch shows is they're not very popular at the moment in the UK in terms of people don't really want to make them because the move is always towards like narrative things with narrative stories. So sketch shows are, no one really likes them, but what they're brilliant at is throwing up a new generation of performers and a new generation of writers because it's like little baby steps towards bigger things. So, and that was the sort of reasoning behind it, and it's hopefully coming back for another series, and so I would call that successful.
Yes.
I've got to send you some writers.
Excellent.
Peter, I'd like to ask you a question. How much creative freedom have you had when you were working with the BBC?
That's a difficult question to answer in this company, isn't it? How honest shall I be?
Completely honest.
Well, I've been working for the BBC for a long time, and not exclusively for them. I started there in 1990 as a graduate trainee in the drama department, or it was called the plays department in those days, rather quaintly. And the honest truth is the BBC is not an edifice, it's the people. So the amount of freedom you have, as long as you're operating within the law, is dependent upon the character of the people who you work for, who your boss is. Now, I've never worked for Hillary, so I can speak openly, but, over the years, there have been very different personalities there running things, and some of them are what you might call laissez-faire, in the sense that they back the talent, and they sort of, obviously there's always a risk that you make a terrible mistake, but they back you. And there are others who almost try to micromanage the process. You can imagine which one is more attractive for a creative person. So it's, obviously, as a writer and director, who feels passionately that the BBC is an important, vital and central part of our broadcasting firmament, I'm always attracted by the idea of working there. But the truth is, you look at the person you're going to be dealing with, and you look at other things like, how quickly will I get a response? One of the problems that the BBC has wrestled with over the years, maybe even decades, is it's just not quick enough in its responses. I remember one occasion, and nobody on the platform was present. I went into a development meeting at the BBC. This was for an in-house show. It was really before the era of indies, but not that long ago. And there were 6 people in the room, and at the end of the meeting, which wasn't conclusive, but it was on a show that everyone wanted to make, the person who was in charge said, well, why don't we all think about it for a month and reconvene? Obviously, because her next meeting was sort of coming up, And I said, well, I must be careful not to say the name, but I said, you know what, so-and-so, there are 6 people in the room and 5 of them are on salary and 1 of them isn't. So why don't we not just go away for a month and reconvene? Why don't we try to take this forward or pass on it? It was a pass.
Did you find the same sort of context in other channels? I mean, Channel 4 in particular?
The thing is, I know this is not helpful, but it really does depend upon the people. Now, there's one respect in which working for the BBC used to be really difficult, but it's much better now, and that was legal and what they call editorial policy. Now, you only have to look at the fact that they've just made 3 Girls, which is a fantastic show, to see that this is no longer the case. But when I made Warriors for the BBC years ago, which was shown here in France, we had the most terrible trouble with the lawyers. And it was one of the reasons why I decided to go and work for Channel 4, because they were a great legal team there who were much more about helping you get the show on the air. Not not encouraging you to defame people or break broadcasting regulations, but helping you rather than saying no, no. And there was a bit of a niet culture at the BBC in legal and editorial policy for a while. I'm happy to say it's completely gone now for a variety of reasons. But apart from that, it really is, you know, if you're someone like me, you look at who's running drama at ITV, you're looking at who's running drama at the BBC, who the exec producers are, and you look at who's running drama at Channel 4 and at Sky, and you think, who would get this? And, you know, if you happen to know them and have worked with them, you know, that's the sort of determining thing, not, is this a BBC show?
Thank you. Now, I would like to talk for a minute about drama writers. The Writers' Guild of Great Britain, which is, I suppose in France, the equivalent would be the SACD, said last week that, and I quote them, "Only the independently wealthy write stories for our screens," unquote. There seems to be an environment where writers are asked to work for free more and more often, and the Writers' Guild even identified that that was in 2015, 87% of writers had experienced an upsurge in the volume of work they had been asked to do for free. Now, where are we with that? And is this linked to a myriad of events like the advance of so many independent producing companies?
Shall I take this? Because we had a big television writers festival 2 weeks ago or so, and this is where the question came up. I have to say, the BBC never condones writers working for nothing in that state. The commissioners were really shocked that it seemed that way. But watching what's online and what's on blogs and talking to writers we know, it does seem to be an indies issue,
yes,
an independent companies issue.
Yes.
And the indies are so desperate to get the work, and often they haven't got the budgets, they're asking writers to do more and more for free. I think writers should be paid. I push every time that writers get paid. I think we understand that a pitch you don't necessarily get paid for, but once you go beyond a side of A4, writers should get paid.
I think that's a little bit disingenuous.
Do you think?
Sorry. Yeah, because the
In my knowledge,
reality
I'm
is
going, Peter.
the reality is it's a fantastically competitive environment, and you are expected to come in with something quite well developed, and that's why people are writing for nothing. It's not that the BBC doesn't pay to develop, it does. It's very honourable about it, but it's the extent of the groundwork that has to be done to get to the point where, rightly or wrongly, indie producers feel they've got something that they can bring in to, not to in-house or BBC Studios, but to the genre controllers who are inundated with stuff. And, you know, it's a bit like in America doing previs, you know, or pre-visualizations of, you know, the only way, if you want to direct a movie, the only way you can do it is shell out your own money or your agent's money and do a computerized pre-visualization of what the movie's going to look like as part of your pitch. Now, we haven't got to that point, but writers, indies are increasingly asking writers to do a certain amount of work on spec so that there's sufficient to go to the pitching meeting.
And obviously what happens with, you know, when a project is being developed within these independent producing companies with very little money for big broadcasters, I mean, they can't, I suppose the big broadcasters can't be naive about it. Obviously, they know that some people, you know, in the background are working, even if you do pay for development, they don't, in an awful lot of cases.
Yeah, there must be an element of that. I mean, I think to Peter's point, I think even where we do pay for development, there has been a bit of a culture in the last few years, which is changing now for reasons I'll go on to say, of only developing up to a treatment. So not commissioning a script. Mm-hmm. Now, a treatment is an enormous amount of work, yes, but you're probably going to be paid 10% of your writer's fee to write it. And if you need it to be fully developed to prove it has legs as a series, as Peter's saying, then that really is a lot of storylining. So I can see that there might be a grievance in the writing community about that. I think that's changing a bit, partly because the SVOD channels won't really look at a project unless there's a script. So if we're interested in making something for Amazon, we have to develop the script before we go there. So that's a bit of a shift away from what the UK broadcasters have been comfortable with.
So do you expect there is a minimum fee writing agreement in the pipeline at the moment? I mean, I know that PACT has been sort of advocating for that. Is this something which is going to come?
I don't know, actually. I don't know whether there may be an argument to say that treatment fees are too low, given the amount of work we now ask for them.
Too right, yes.
And particularly if there's a research element as well. But sometimes we pay for research separately, so that you can deal with it that way.
Right. Coming back to, you were talking about diversity and how the BBC was, trying to really promote that. I mean, recent studies show that there is a substantial gap between male and female screenwriters, both in terms of numbers and in terms of what they're being paid. What is the BBC doing about that?
That feels to me to be one of the things that Piers has really focused on in the last year, and it's changed quite a lot. I think the figures have improved quite a lot, haven't they?
Yes, the Writers Guild report goes up and includes 2016. Now, Piers took over 2 years ago.
2 years, yeah.
Yeah, so his current slate is 40% female.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly since Rose Garnett took over BBC Films, her slate is 45% female. Yeah. We would never we do a lot more than drama room and comedy room. We would never have a gender imbalance. We would always have, we would make sure there's a fair representation. One of the things that we do is bring forward the voices that we know are lacking. So we work a lot with BAME writers. We always bring women through. We work a lot in the nations, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland. We know there's a real will to change it. And I'm not by any means justifying the figures that have been so in the BBC. And
nobody's complacent.
Nobody's complacent. I'm certainly not. I mean, certainly, I've worked with Hilary over the years, and we've done a lot between us to try and change that. And I think the figures are shocking, but I do think they're out of date for the BBC at the moment. I think there's more to do in comedy.
Yes.
But again, we are talking to the comedy commissioners about that. We've got various initiatives on the go at the moment with female comedy writers.
Ben, would you like to?
I think there is a definite thing now that she's kind of like, if you've got a script that you think is funny and it's written by a woman writer or a BAME writer, that's like a real good plus point. You think, if it's written by like an old white man, you're like, it's written by an old white man. It's really funny, but it's not so good. But if it's not that, you go, that's really good. That's a real positive thing about this project that I can make people aware of. So I think there's a definite sort of trend, a general hunger for things not by old white men.
The downside of it is that certain writers are deemed to be, saleable because they're black or female or young or whatever, and they're getting swamped early in their career by a load of completely unrealistic commissions. And I think, we try to protect the writers. And sometimes I say to writers, look, stop going out for meetings. You've got a couple of great relationships. Just concentrate on that. Work with that producer. You don't need to meet all those other people. They'll still want you in 6 months' time. I think there's a bit of a feeding frenzy going on, particularly because of the Sky check boxes and all the rest of it. And I have a load of people phone me up and go, can you send me your top 10 list of black writers? And I just go, well, no, actually. What does that even mean?
Yeah. But what is great is I think we're seeing a kind of a whole new direction for BAME writers in the sense that there are so many really exciting and talented up-and-coming writers from different backgrounds.
Yeah, no, there really
Whereas
is.
it's, I don't think your list of the top 10 BAME writers would have looked so happy 10 years ago.
Is there a specific effort made by the BBC's Writers' Room to attract screenwriters from different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds?
Absolutely. I mean, we ourselves are a very mixed team. And I think that helps, actually, when we go out and about. Yes. We have all sorts of creative partnerships with some of the black theatre companies. Look, I won't bore you, there's loads. We've made a series of short films with black and BME writers. The short answer is yes.
Okay. Now, I'd like to move on to something which everybody's talking about. It's collaborating with what you call FANGs in Great Britain, which is the new platforms, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, etc. What are the specific advantages, if any, and the challenges? Who would like to start on this? Hilary?
Shall I start?
Yes, please.
Peter and I were talking a little bit about this before we came in. So I'm not sure how many years, it's a very short time in which we've been working with FANGs, SVOD platforms, whatever we want to call them. And there's been a bit of a kind of honeymoon period where a lot of money has been poured into UK drama in co-production to create some really wonderful, you know, very high quality, very expensive dramas on BBC One and elsewhere. And there's now a shift from those platforms to commission original dramas, i.e. things which are not going to appear on the BBC first and are just going to appear on those platforms. And there's a shift away from wanting to co-produce with broadcasters.
So how long do you think these FANGs, I mean, these digital platforms are going to be willing to cooperate with?
It doesn't feel like very much longer.
No, and I mean, Netflix is just talking about opening a studio in London.
Yes. Well, that's the other thing. So one thing is only wanting to do originals and not wanting another broadcaster involved. And I can see the frustration. You know, the BBC, when it's involved in a show, kind of demands everything. I mean, they demand, you know, all the kind of marketing, the way a show is marketed, in particular when it's transmitted. Yes. Even if they're a junior partner, you know, they want the premiere. So BBC asks for a lot sometimes for its licence fee. What did you ask me? Sorry,
I was just wondering how long, you know, this sort of cooperation. And my next question will be.
Oh well, the next question, yeah. So the other thing, apart from wanting to do original dramas, is that they're starting to cut out production companies altogether.
Yes.
So they're starting to go direct to the talent, sign them up for 2-3 year deals, and we're talking about actors, top writers, directors. This is true in the States as well as here. So Ryan Murphy, that, you know, huge producer at FX, has signed with Netflix, I think. So they're going to start to make shows themselves as studios themselves.
Apparently, it's not just British talents who are highly vulnerable to the appeal of these companies. I mean, you know, in Scandinavia, Germany, they've started sucking people out into their.
Well, you know, one fears that people like Peter Moffat, Sally Wainwright, those kind of writers who've been so much of the landscape in the BBC.
Your microphone can be a little bit closer to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. If they sign deals like that, then they're kind of lost to the BBC from any direction, from any company.
Peter?
Yeah, well, this is serious.
Yes.
Let me just try and expound the scenario. So the cost of high-end television drama has skyrocketed. Used to be about 1.2 million an hour, now it's north of 2 million an hour. But the license fees from the public service broadcasters like the BBC and Channel 4 have remained static, roughly 800,000 an hour. So that's quite a lot less than half. Now, even if you factor in what we call the soft money, the tax breaks, you're still looking at around about $1 million an hour coming from the public service broadcasters for something that's costing double that. Now, traditionally, the way we've dealt with this is by a sales company coming in and doing an advance against sales to, you know, for example, Canal Plus. But they can't fill a gap as wide as that. And what's more, the companies that they rely on are also feeling the squeeze from the SVODs of the Netflix and the Apples. And so, okay, you've got a 1 million per hour gap. The sales company can't get even close. How do you fill it? Well, typically, historically, in the relatively recent past, we've gone to the SVODs, and they've been prepared to co-produce with the BBC, for example, or Channel 4. Now, Apple came on the scene with a $1 billion commissioning budget, and they
deep pockets,
very deep pockets, and made it clear right from the outset that they weren't going to co-produce. Netflix have now sort of, it's becoming clear that they're not going to, and they're withdrawing from certain co-productions that people thought were already agreed. Amazon have never done that much anyway. So there's literally a question right now of how public service broadcasters like the BBC get their shows funded. You know, there's a shortfall. Okay, so you say, well, all right, I'm an independent person. You know, it's very tough for the BBC, but I'll go straight to the SVODs. I don't care. I'll go and get fully funded. Well, it's not as simple as that. Because if you go and talk to Apple or Netflix or someone like that, they will talk about global appeal. Well, there's nothing wrong with global appeal, but not everything has global appeal. 3 Girls, for example, which you saw a clip from, 8.1 million people watched it. A huge amount of press coverage in Britain, a very, very personal British story, an important one to tell. I applaud for the BBC for having done it. Absolutely no global appeal in that at all. So that's not going to get fully funded by any of the SVODs. And yet the price of it goes up, and the money doesn't work anymore. So how do those shows get made? And then there's a further piece of bad news, which Hillary's alluded to. The SVODs want the whole IP.
Yes.
They want to buy the whole thing. You get no back-end profit participation, so no chance to share in the success of the programs you've made. You just get a fee. You're a gun for hire. You're bought out, and then it's goodbye. They buy up the talent and put them on contract and then don't commission them. So almost like put them in cold storage so no one else can hire them. And the result of all this is the indies are being crushed, because if the way the indies work is, you know, the fact that they have stuff that they can sell. They have an ownership position in the material they produce. They no longer have that with the SVODs. They are literally just freelancers who are hired in. The result is the financial model that's made the indies in the UK successful, it will break down. We're in the middle of the Uberization of the British television industry, and it's really, really scary.
Yeah. Have they started knocking on your door as well, Ben?
No, they for some reason they haven't been knocking at my door. I think the thing is, in the world of comedy, comedy is like the most risky thing you can do. And I think the Netflixes of the world, in the world of comedy, only really want to make safe bets. So they're only doing, they'll make another season of Arrested Development because Arrested Development has already been popular. They'll give stand-up shows to big-name stand-up comedians because they know they're already popular. But the sort of comedy that I do, and you know, in a good way that the BBC does, is how you grow those comedians is a really key thing, because the BBC puts money behind growing people, taking risks on people that may or may not make you laugh at the end of the day, but Netflix aren't. And if Netflix's fangs take over the world, they don't seem at the moment to be wanting to do those little seed development things that will produce the new comic faces, the new comic writers, because they only want to take surefire bets, really.
Yeah, I'd like to rebound on what you have just been saying and Peter's been saying, and I'd like to quote Patrick Holland, who is the controller of BBC Two. He said a month ago that, and I quote him, "Producers risk selling the golden goose by striking deals which hand over, as you said, intellectual property entirely to the digital players. And they effectively miss on the creative input of the BBC. If we're talking about the BBC, you can offer ideas, development. Netflix doesn't do that, which you have just confirmed. So obviously, yes, it is scary. I would agree with you on that. He also criticized their lack of involvement in the pre-production process. And this is something I think that you still have, which is very precious, and that I hope you're going to hang on to. Are you?
Yes, and I think our experience of working with Amazon on a comedy show, as it happens.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh, yes, remember that?
I remember that now.
Good Omens.
Good Omens, yes.
Is that they're very involved in production.
I'm not really involved in that show, but I've heard a lot of angry telephone calls about it.
There you go. Anger means involvement.
Okay.
I can add to that I know someone who worked at the head of department level on an Amazon show, and every Friday during the shoot, all the heads of department were required to come on a conference call at the end of a long shooting day, late because it's Los Angeles time, to discuss the opinions of executives back at Amazon of the work that they've been producing for the week. Now, you know, and in all the experience I've had with all the different broadcasters, and even, I have to say, with Hollywood studios, I've never known that level of disrespect,
yes.
really.
It is disrespect, yes.
To get people on the phone mid-shoot and start spitballing ideas when people are actually trying to stay on budget, on schedule, and produce a show based on a script that had already been agreed and signed off, with casting that had already been agreed and signed off. I think that's appalling. And
yes.
so the idea that they're hands-off, to me, is a non-starter.
Okay. So, I mean, in a way, you not only risk losing your talents, you also risk losing your soul.
That's a risk I'm not prepared to take.
Okay. So how are you going to fight that over the next few years? I mean, obviously, as you said, there is this big financial gap. I mean, what is there to do?
Well, prices aren't going to come down. They sure as hell are not going to come down. I don't know is the answer. I mean, it's the merger that we've had recently with BBC Worldwide, who have been the BBC's commercial distribution arm, I think will help us. I think that merger will mean that there are some shows which we can decide as a group to support.
Yes.
Potentially even underwrite. That's not going to happen all the time, but it would happen for things that look like either they might make their money back or are just so important to BBC Studios they have to be made. Be an element of that, but it can't happen for everything. I don't know. I think it's very difficult.
Well, could we imagine, I'm not talking about unity because it would be completely naive, but some form of cooperation like a UK TV which would be co-owned by public broadcasters in Britain? Is this something that, you know, I mean, it's happened in Scandinavia, it is now happening in Spain. They're making a great big effort to talk to people who are obviously their competitors, commercial broadcasters, and they're trying to work together regionally in the, you know, biggest sense of the term. Is this something which could happen?
I've no idea, but potentially, I guess. With Channel 4, there have been initiatives with Channel 4 in the past.
There is an alternative. I mean, it's difficult because the BBC is funded by the licence fee, and Channel 4 and ITV are funded by commercial advertising in the main. So I think it is quite difficult to do that. But there is another way. And the BBC and Channel 4 and Channel 5 and ITV and Sky are regulated under the terms of the Broadcasting Act, and they are regulated by Ofcom, which is our regulator in the UK. The SVODs broadcast into our living rooms. You know, on a smart TV, they pop up on your TV just the same as the BBC does, but they are completely unregulated.
Yes. Yeah.
The only thing is, I imagine they have to, you know, stay within the laws of the land, so the police don't go knocking on their doors. But apart from that, they are completely, they have none of the obligations that the BBC and other public service broadcasters have. And I think the solution to this problem is to bring them into the, as the EU has been discussing doing, bring them into the regulatory framework and give them certain obligations.
Are you optimistic on that? Do you think it's going
Absolutely
to
not.
take shape? Not.
Because they're big and powerful, and you know, and the broadcasters will have to work in concert, and they, most importantly, they would have to have the support of the British government. And you know, this is a government at the moment that is, its number one priority is Brexit, God help us, and doing a trade deal with America. And can you imagine trying to regulate the American entertainment industry at the very point where you're trying to do a trade deal with Donald Trump? You know, and I think that's the way, but it's going to be a tall order. Yeah,
big soul-selling exercise coming up. I mean, on that, you know, that's the last one for the road on SVODs, on these platforms. There was a remark by Tony Hall, the BBC Director General, who stressed that the global SVOD platform do not hold, I quote, British values. That's quite a pretty strong one, this one. Who would like to comment on that? What are British values? That's your boss who said
That's
that.
a really tough one, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, a platform like Netflix contains so much content. It's an enormous amount of content. And there are only like 2 or 3 shows, maybe 4 shows that we probably, you know, within our own coterie, rate and watch. So I'm not really sure what that means. I mean, Peter's point about, you know, they have to be maybe for a global audience means that innately they're unlikely to be specifically British. But, you know, Happy Valley has thrived on Netflix.
Oh, yes.
And that couldn't be a more British show.
That's right. Yes.
So I'm not sure. And indeed, you know, the SVOD platforms talk about wanting specificity of place and community, and they want to make shows for different communities. So there'll be bound to be some British shows in there as well.
Are we talking about decency, honesty, that sort of things? People who are respectful of cues, which we are not in other parts of the world. You know,
I can't. For the life of me, I can't think of any examples of real transgression in those areas. There may be some. Can you?
Peter, when you say British, I mean, you hear British
I
values.
think Tony's talking about what I was trying to, you know, rather clumsily say, which is that they don't have any either regulatory or, frankly, gut commitment to telling British stories. I mean, I don't know because I wasn't there when he said it, but, you know, I've pitched to some of the SVODs. You know, guys arrive from California, it usually is guys actually, and I would be really careful here because these meetings are obviously private, but you know, some of the things that are said make your jaw drop, really.
Like what?
You know, can I just say, I don't know how many, I know it's an international festival, I don't know how many people here are French. You know, you have this great, well, first of all, the French understand culture in the way that we have never done. But secondly, you have this great protection, which is the French language. We have the misfortune, arguably, to share a language. So we, you know, it's very easy for us to become like the 51st state. You know, there will always be protection for programs in French because, you know what? That's the language people in this country speak. But the difficulty is, you know, I look at my children, they watch an unexpurgated diet of American stuff. Mostly on Netflix, and it's just the worst kind of cultural imperialism to me, and I really worry that what, you know, on the one hand, politically we're trying to be more British, God help us, but at the same time our culture is being completely flattened, and it's a worrying time. Sorry to be so gloomy.
Oh, I mean, this morning it you know, mirrors what somebody said in one of the conclaves we were having this morning. A German participant said that apart from the Netflix and the sort of quote-unquote cultural, you know, product that this is, there is nothing which is representing America. They don't sell cars anymore in the rest of the world. Nobody's interested in their jeans anymore, and so on and so forth. The only export they have massively at the moment is this, you know, everything that they export through the platforms, and they're all American so far. So this is something we can reflect on, I suppose. So how did this series come about? I mean, did you commissioned it, did you?
I executed it, and as I was saying earlier, I got a really great black producer, his first time producing, called Akinji, and the pilot of it, it was quite an odd process because when we first started to get writers for it, we wrote a writer's brief, but AK, the producer, said, "Oh, I don't want. You shouldn't mention that it's got a black cast." And I was like, "If we don't mention it's got a black cast, we might just get lots of sketches that are like Downton Abbey spoofs, you know." And then so I said, "Well, could we say urban?" And he said, "No, that's just the same." So we didn't really mention it, and it took a while for us to get what the Famalam thing was, and with the pilot we did, like half of it we didn't use, and we went and reshot some stuff because we realised in making it what our world was and what it wasn't. And I think sometimes the sketches are about being black and British, and some of the time they're not. They're just kind of about youth culture sometimes, and sometimes they are mad, sometimes they're very visual. I think we realised that for our audience, visuals were more important than words. We'd originally written lots of sketches, but like a lot of sketches are two people talking. You'd watch them and you go, this is sort of boring. Let's do some more sketches like that where people are fighting each other. And so it took a while. Even in the series, we ended up reshooting some sketches or reshooting new sketches because it's a process that we learn what our kind of remit was.
Okay. Now I'd like to, because we're going to have to call it a day in a moment. If I may ask, what are you all working on at the moment? I mean, Hilary, you told me something about Englistan. Could you say a few words about this?
So Englistan is our next commission for BBC Two. Right now I'm working on a show called Mother, Father, Son, which is written by Tom Rob Smith, who wrote a show called London Spy that was a BBC Two show, and has more recently written The Assassination of Gianni Versace series for FX. And that's a big political thriller, 8 parts, BBC Two, with an amazing cast, which includes Richard Gere. Isn't that exciting, playing an American self-made businessman who has a media empire, very charismatic figure. But then after that, so we're developing the scripts this year to make next year a show called Englistan, which is Riz Ahmed's portrait of a family through the generations from the end of the 1970s through to the present day. And it's inspired by his own family and friends. And the family is a Pakistani Muslim family who've emigrated to the UK in the 70s, and it's part of Riz's history as he grew up in Wembley in North London. It's a very ordinary background. And it follows the course of the family and the generations of that family over those years. And in the course of telling the story, it reflects social change, economic change, political change, the change in the attitudes towards that community over those years. Obviously 9/11 is a very big turning point in that, and he also has an episode where he flashes back to partition to look at the damage that was done to the family in that period. So it's a hugely ambitious show. Riz is writing some episodes and directing the first 2 episodes. And actually, we have been operating a writer's room on that show.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Now I remember. So we've got 4 other writers who are all from an Asian background, and they're all up-and-coming writers, and Riz is helping them develop the story and write those episodes. So
How many episodes are we going?
9.
9 episodes. Okay.
It's a big one.
When, if I may ask, do we have a chance of having it next year?
No.
Here? No? 2 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. All right. We're making a note of that.
Okay.
Ben, what are you working on at the moment?
I'm working on more Famalam.
Oh, yes.
If you like Famalam,
Yes.
then you are in for a treat, because there'll be more quite similar sketches
Okay.
to this series. We are hopefully broadening out our writing team a bit, and we are sticking with the same gang of actors, but hopefully now we know what we are doing, we will do it in a lot more relaxed way.
Okay. Anne, are you working on something specific at the moment?
Yes, we're about to make, well, not about to, we're going to do a call out for monologue scripts in Northern Ireland to make 5 short films reflecting contemporary Northern Irish life, not just about the Troubles, but something that's contemporary. We're going to do something in North Wales with writers there to go alongside a daytime show, to put some material online from new writers. We've just placed 4 comedy writers in with indies and studios in Scotland to develop shows from Scotland. I'm about to kick off, I hope, a big disabled writers project, which actually I'm talking to Hilary about, and Tim Prager from Silent Witness. We're collecting sort of a dozen of the best disabled writers in the country together to develop their careers, well, and other stuff.
So you're doing a lot in the nations and regions, are you? It's not
We are.
London-centric
We're also
so
going
much.
to we've just kicked off our new drama room, which is a cracking collection of writers. With a strong, diverse element, although we've done no positive action on that. They just happen to be really brilliant writers coming through. We're just selecting for our next comedy room. We've got 10 writers on full script commission with indies at the moment as well, developing authored series for the BBC, and so on.
Full blast.
With loads. What can I say?
Peter.
Well, about a year ago in London, there was a fire in Grenfell Tower, and it was a terrifying and unprecedented event, and 72 people, I think, lost their lives in the most appalling circumstances. So the BBC have asked me to make a drama about this, but we're taking our time. There's a public inquiry at the moment, and we're attending it every day. In fact, my colleague is there right now, attending, and slowly we will. You know, one of the things drama can do is it can get us a little bit of a distance on subject and get a bit of a perspective that the daily reporting or even a quick turnaround documentary can't achieve. So we're not going to rush to judgment. You know, at the moment it seems pretty likely what the causes were, but we're going to just take a while and see what emerges. And BBC have commissioned it on the understanding that it won't be a quick turnaround, that it'll be a slower. So I'm working on that.
It's going to be a series.
Yeah.
Yes. And how many episodes do you know yet? Or?
Well, that would be a matter for the BBC ultimately, but currently it's looking like 4 parts.
Okay. Right. Well, that certainly is very interesting, but it's going to be so difficult to be working with, you know, the poignant. I mean, you know, what we've heard in the past few days is just terrifying, frankly. Now, what do you think traditional channels, public service broadcasters in particular, should do to keep on producing these very fresh, very innovative drama and comedy? What do you think? What way do they have to go? Hilary?
Well, backing new talent has to be key to that, doesn't it?
Backing new talent.
You know, and as we've heard, that's something that the big players are not great at doing. And it's something that public service broadcasters are uniquely charged with doing.
Yes.
The smaller pieces, the whole diverse range of pieces. I suppose, you know, you have to look to the things that are not being serviced by those big players, but also at the same time not get sucked into the notion that that's all public service broadcasting should be doing. So I think that's the difficulty. It's keeping some of those big pieces going that, as Peter's saying, becoming unaffordable without co-production. They're also difficult to get big audiences for because the audience is so fragmented now. It's a tough time. It's a tough time.
Yes. Everybody was talking about a new golden age of television drama, but golden age with
that was 2 years ago. It was only 2 years ago. I can remember the season. There was a winter season on BBC One, and it started on Sunday nights with War and Peace, which is a beautiful adaptation of that book. And then the next show was The Night Manager, again in the same slot on Sunday night, and that was like having James Bond on telly for the licence fee, 6 nights, 6 Sundays in a row. And then I did a show called Undercover, you saw a clip from, with Sophie Okonedo and Adrian Lester. Say Anton Lester. Adrian Lester, which in its own way was landmark because it had a black family right at the centre of it on BBC One Sunday night. And then Happy Valley 2 was playing on weekdays. Yes. And I thought, if ever there was a golden age, this is a golden age. Yes. But now I feel a bit like that was then. Okay. And that's only 2 years ago.
Okay. Is that, I mean, do you have the same point of view, Anne?
I don't know. I mean, I would say back new talent, but I would do, wouldn't I? Do you know, I think something like BBC Writers' Room is unique. I don't think we'd be funded by any of the SVODs of any of the other broadcasters. I think we're unique to the BBC. I think the fact that we've survived in an era of BBC cuts shows the BBC's backing new talent.
I wanted to say something about your website. I mean, the BBC Writers' Room website is absolutely phenomenal. For example, the series we're showing tonight, A Very English Scandal, if you want to read the script, it's there, free of charge. Go onto the BBC Writers' Room website and you'll read the script. You know, that's one of the things you do. We
have all the scripts of the major shows. We're very well supported by the A-list writers. People are very generous about letting us put scripts up.
This is fabulous.
There's loads of blogs from producers, from writers. There's loads of tips. There's a thing on there at the moment about writing sitcom for BBC One, which is something else we're about to do actually with Shane.
Do you put out the script as written or as broadcast?
That's a really good question.
Because I'm not sure I'd want my scripts.
I think it was as broadcast.
I think it's
I checked
broadcast.
it.
Yeah.
I think it is,
Because we make some decisions in the cutting room, you know.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's as broadcast.
Yeah, I'm a maniac,
actually.
and I did check it, and it was word for word with the broadcast.
Do you have a life?
Yes, indeed, because we did want to get hold of a script of an earlier version of something,
Yeah.
so that the writers could compare of it, but they didn't want us to have that.
What should we do, Ben, to keep going and keep producing something fresh?
I'm finding this chair really slippery. I'm just pointing that out. It's nothing to do. It's forcing me sort of slowly to slide towards Hillary in a sort of ungainly, loose manner.
I'm so hot, that wouldn't be possible.
I'll sit up straight. I don't know. I think, what can you do but keep doing things? I think as much as sort of new technology that isn't that new has changed the TV landscape, it's also made it, in some ways, kind of, if you're a comic performer, you can now, you don't need any of those people. You can make your own clips on your phone, and you can put them on YouTube. You can bypass everyone and make your own show. And several comedies that have been hits on BBC have really originated from people making their own stuff on YouTube. So there is a positive side to it in the world of comedy anyway, because people can control and do their own things. And that's what lots of young people are doing, and I wish them every success.
Peter?
I think you can still find an audience if you're prepared to go for the jugular. You know, I think this is late in the conversation to raise this, but the reality that we're all dodging is the year-on-year decline of overall audiences. Yes. You know, we're fighting over a smaller and smaller group of people. And Ben, of course, is right that you can. You know, one of the great advantages compared with when I started is you can just get an iPhone and make your own film and put it up on YouTube and, you know, hope some people find it. So we don't hold the reins of distribution in the way that we used to. But I think the thing for me over the years that has sort of killed television is it's how anodyne it is. You know, it's sort of like a kind of visual mogadon often. I mean, there are some honourable exceptions, and we've talked about some today. I think if television is prepared to be naughty enough, politically, socially, you know, and comedy tends to lead the way in this,
Yes.
It'll find its audience. But we have to also find a way of accommodating new voices and that come up through non-traditional broadcast routes.
Final question. Supposing you were each given one wish, you know, for the future of public service broadcasting, let's say in Britain, what would it be?
Well, you're looking at me, and I can't really. We're great at answering this question, but what I would say is, I suppose I wish that in Britain people would value the BBC a bit more. I get a bit fed up that the BBC gets knocked from the right wing, and the left wing sort of knocks it as mainstream media and whatever. And I always think, well, you'll miss it when it's gone.
Definitely.
Do you know that actually I've lived abroad, I've lived in Australia, lived in various places, and you come back and think, oh gosh, I really value the BBC, and I just wish people would just take a breath and see it as something worth fighting for.
Thank you. Ben, your wish.
I have a lot of wishes and dreams. How many of them are to do with public service broadcasting? Let me have a think. I think I would slightly echo Anne's thing. The worst thing that happens, you go to a party and you talk to someone and, oh, what do you do? And you go, oh, I work in the BBC. And they go, oh, we don't have a telly. And you think, I don't, but what do you do? I don't tell you, but I don't do the thing you do. And they always go, I don't have a telly. And they go, well, we don't watch any telly. And then they go, well, we watch The Apprentice. We like The Apprentice. We watch it on the computer. Yeah. Oh, and then you suddenly reveal that they're watching loads of stuff. Yeah. And they're just, for some reason, pretending that you don't have a telly or you don't watch telly is in some way sort of cool or subversive or something. And it turns out they like watching telly all the time. They've seen all of Game of Thrones. And you're like, just say, when I say I work for the BBC, just go, oh, that's quite good. I quite like one show that you make. And you go, oh, that's nice. I mean, it's more to do with me than public service broadcasting, but that's all I've got.
It's kind of inverted snobism, isn't it?
It is in a way, and it's sort of people often when you say BBC, they go, "Oh, I don't. What's the TV license for? I don't have anything to do with it." And then when you really ask them, they go, "Oh, they listen to the radio all the time, or they watch the golf or something like that. They watch loads of stuff, and they sort of pretend to themselves that somehow this comes free to them in some way." So that just annoys me, really, rather than it's not a dream, is it? That's sort of hatred, which is different.
Well, I will leave this to Hilary for the final word. Peter, what would be your wish?
Oh, simple. Bring the SVODs into the world of regulation.
Yes, okay. Hilary?
My wish would be that the BBC stays relevant. I don't think it has a divine right to exist. I think it needs to stay relevant to its audiences and find new ways of doing that and adapt pretty quickly, actually.
Long live to the BBC. Thank you very much.